Welcome, everyone. This is episode 2 of the Platform Engineering Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Dallas, and today we have Will Button. Great to have you, Will.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Will, you got an interesting background and an interesting story. You are currently a DevOps engineer at Polygon, but you also have a YouTube channel for DevOps and DevOps engineers. Would love if you could give a quick intro on yourself, brief the audience. Who is Will Button?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a senior DevOps engineer for Polygon Labs, where we build the Polygon blockchain. And then I also run the DevOps for Developers YouTube channel. And I'm the co-host of the Adventures in DevOps podcast. And all of this DevOps stuff has just been a culmination of a few decades working in tech, just kind of stumbling my way through. And one day I found out that all of the things that I was doing had a name, and that name was DevOps.
I love it. And names in DevOps are very, very varied, let's say. There's a lot of different titles, and they've changed quite a bit over the last couple of years. We'll get to that. But of those three things, which was first? How'd you get here? Love to hear a little bit of the Will story.
Yeah, for sure. I've been doing the YouTube channel for the longest, I think about either 2 or 3 years now. I've been doing that. I've been with Polygon since August and been on the podcast for about a year, but all of that just came as a progression of my career. You know, way back years ago, I spent my whole career working for early stage startups. And one of the cool things that no one tells you about early stage startups, they tell you get a lot of experience, and it's a quick way to master a lot of skills very quickly. But one of the things that isn't really talked about a lot in startups is, a lot of them fail, and some of them have payroll issues long before they fail. And I sort of learned that the hard way. But I really like to do it in startups, and it's like, okay, I want to do this. And had some really good friends that said, well, if you're going to do this, you've got to have a secondary source of income so that if the startups you're working for don't make it, that you still have a way to put food on the table for your family. And so that led me down to meeting some of the guys who run egghead.io, which is a web development tutorial site. And so I started making a bunch of videos for them on different topics, JavaScript, Node.js, Elasticsearch, DevOps type stuff. And I made royalties off of that, which was pretty cool. It's like, dang, I get to just talk about stuff that I'm doing anyway, and I get paid for it. And so that started me down the whole path of creating videos, and had a lot of fun with that. And that just led to me creating the YouTube channel. And really, like, the main goal of the YouTube channel now is not monetizing it, but just I've been doing this for a long time and have some different thoughts and opinions and some experiences to share with people who are just starting their DevOps journey. Or, as the name of the channel, DevOps for Developers, implies, I really treat DevOps as like a tool for developers and how they get their code to build and run in production at scale. And while they may not need to know a lot of the ins and outs of DevOps, I think it's really good if you're going to be a software engineer for a long time, that these are really good skills to understand how your code that you're writing on your local workstation behaves and operates once it gets out into production, because that's going to influence some of the design decisions that you make as you're typing out that code.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, you've been doing this for a good amount of time, and I think DevOps as a title or as an industry has changed a lot in that. I think one common thing I hear with DevOps is it's actually a very loosely defined industry. It's all the things that aren't writing code or are adjacent to making that code run. And it's changed quite a bit in this time as we've come out with newer and newer technologies. Curious, how do you think about, and it's a broad question, but what's the definition of DevOps that you use and we should use for the rest of this conversation?
For me, I treat DevOps as a way to enable developers to do the right thing even when they don't know what the right thing is, because their job's to write code, and they're experts at doing that. And it's not really realistic for them to have, like this huge, broad skill set where they can write super efficient, highly performant algorithms and configure an Nginx as a load balancer. It's too much to take on. So my goal when I do DevOps is to put in a set of tools so that they can just push their code to production. And if they need load balancers or SSL certs or, CDN or whatever it is that they need, that all of that stuff just happens for them so that their code is safe and secure and performant out in production.
That's great. I love the thing that you're hitting on there is really around scaling expertise. There's a million jobs to be done and more every year. I think back to the on-prem days, what was an Nginx load balancer? What? You couldn't have learned to configure that 10 years ago. But, as we have more and more jobs coming out and we have more and more devs who need to do all of those jobs, that doesn't scale. How are you going to expect a new grad to be able to do every single thing perfectly? It's just unrealistic. And so, in your job now, you're helping lots of devs get their stuff done. But I love even with this YouTube channel you're just scaling the expertise. Here's a lesson I've learned. Here's a pitfall not to fall into. Helping that kind of next generation. It's great.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the content I have on the YouTube channel is not really hands-on technical, but more like theoretical and how to think about problems. What are the things I don't know about that should be influencing this decision?
Yeah. So one of the big trends that we see in DevOps right now and what we talk about a lot here at Zeet and on this podcast is this trend of platform engineering. I think you've seen the words DevOps is dead. That's the moniker floating around. Everyone's talking about right now.
Right.
I'm curious your take on it, and I know you've talked about this a little bit recently, but is DevOps dead? Is this just an evolution? Did it ever really exist in the first place? What do you think?
I think it's a lot like, good television marketing. Like any publicity is good publicity. But, DevOps might be dead, which is probably okay, because if we go back to, around 2008, whenever the term first came out, DevOps was originally not who did what, but how we did what. It was this framework, or it was very much like Agile. It's this thing that you do. It's not who does it. And so here I sit with the title of DevOps engineer, but DevOps isn't really a title. And so I think platform engineering kind of helps clear up that misconception, because platform engineering, in my opinion, is really doing the DevOps things and using tools that didn't really exist when the term DevOps was coined. I think it's a clear distinction that you have platform engineers who implement DevOps frameworks that enable the software developers to build and scale the code that they write.
I really like that distinction. And I think Agile came up in a previous conversation as well. But yeah, fundamentally, DevOps, what is that? That's supporting developers. It's scaling the expertise. It's the pieces you talked about there. The technologies and the strategies and the tactics that you use to implement good DevOps methodologies, well, that's depending on your stack, your type of application, how many developers do you have, how experienced are they, what's the company size, a million factors. I love that distinction of DevOps. This is just a core idea. It can't die. How can you stop supporting developers? What does that even mean? How you do it, well, that should change, and that is changing now, and maybe that's what platform engineering is.
Yeah, I think a great analogy for it is transportation. Transportation is a broad topic, and you can't say, well, what tools do we use for transportation? Because a lot of that is defined by where you're going. If you're going, just down the street to the corner grocery store, there are certain modes of transportation that apply, but if you're traveling halfway around the world, you're probably going to choose a different mode of transportation. And I think DevOps is the same way. Doing DevOps is highly dependent on where you're at and where you're trying to get to.
That's great. I'm imagining Henry Ford coming out of the factory, having built the first automobile, and being like, guys, transportation is dead. It's over. We have cars now.
Right.
Nope, everyone would have. That makes no sense. So it does feel like a bit of a marketing push, hair on fire. Yeah, okay, what we thought of as DevOps, that could be at the end, and that's good. We're innovating, we're growing as an industry. We defined in our last episode kind of what a platform is, or what a developer platform is, as the surface area that developers have to interact with to do their job. Do you have to go to GitHub and see a comment there that tells you your preview URL? Where do you go to get your logs when you need DNS provisioned? Who do you ask? How do you get that? Is it self-serve or is it a Jira ticket or something else? I'm curious. This kind of goes into the Polygon world that you're in now. In your day-to-day now, what's the developer platform look like at Polygon, or what's the developer platform that you interact with on a day-to-day?
I think Polygon's a great example of that, of how that whole process evolves as your team matures. Polygon started off as a small startup with just a few people there. And so, it's not realistic or feasible to put in something that's self-serve at that point. So you would have, just actual conversations with the software engineering teams and the infrastructure teams. Say, hey, we're going to production with this. Here's what we think we need. What do we actually need? And so there was conversations in Slack. And then as the team matured, it went to, oh, we need tickets for this to track what we're doing. And then that brings us up to the part where we're at Polygon right now, where tickets are really, they're effective, but there's so many things moving so quickly over at Polygon that most of the work that we do from my perspective on DevOps, I'll get a ticket or have a conversation with someone and immediately think, dang, dude, I would have loved to have been a part of this conversation 2 months ago when it was in the design phase. And that's a really hard problem to solve, because when you're sitting there, regardless of what team you're in, when you're sitting there working on a new project, it's not realistic to think about people who you should pull in that you don't normally work with. It's if you do have those skills, it's a very rare set of skills, but it just doesn't scale well because that's entirely dependent on a human. And I think that's what takes us to wanting to move to a self-serve model, where, okay, this isn't the perfect system, but this covers a huge percentage of what we do. And you go here and you can self-serve, and it sets up a lot of the defaults that we need in the environment without you having to remember that you had to contact DevOps and then hit DevOps up over Slack and then have them tell you, oh, you got to log a ticket and then go find the ticketing system and open a ticket and wait for it to sit in DevOps queue for them to get to it. That's just frustrating and slows the whole thing down. So I think that's where self-serve models really come and really start to show like their value, is it allows people to just grab things that they need. And while it may not be perfect, it's probably good enough to get them really far down the road and saves them a lot of time because they're not having these back and forth conversations.
Yeah, I'd be really curious, if you are building an IDP, what do you think are the top things to consider? If there's a new IDP team, new platform engineer looking out to build an IDP for a company, let's say the similar size as Polygon, what would be the right first thing to do?
So I think the first thing to do is really socialize that effort. Get feedback from your customers, because this is something I say over and over again. As a DevOps engineer or as a platform engineering team, the software engineers are your customers. And so if you're going to be successful, you've got to build something that your customers feel like they need and delivers what they want. So socialize with them, get their early input, and then try to standardize on just a couple of products at first. Don't try to roll out everything that can do anything possible with little input. Say, hey, we build a lot of APIs. Let's say we do microservices, and so everything's an API. Well, a lot of those APIs from a deployment perspective probably look pretty similar. They're probably running like a Docker container behind a load balancer with an SSL cert. So start with that, make that your first product, and then release it, get your developers or your software engineers to start using it and get their feedback on it, iterate it, and then make it a win for them. And this is one of the things I did at a company called Aptiv a few years back. We built an internal developer platform as they started growing, and it worked really well there because I built something that they were able to use, and then they saw some wins. They got some early wins out of it that relieved some of the pain that they were having. So that made them excited to use it, and then they started asking for more. And one of the things that my team did is, as they asked for more, is our standard response was, well, we accept pull requests. And before you know it, the software engineering team was opening up pull requests to add new features to the IDP. And for the most part, we were just sitting back merging pull requests going, yeah, this is a pretty good gig.
Well, I love a couple of things that you kind of are already just in how you describe that. You're really embodying the platform engineering methodology here because you're talking about customers. You're approaching this like a product. That's awesome. I love that. I think like this is the biggest shift that has to happen. The biggest shift that I see of this DevOps is dying idea is don't treat it like ticket ops and don't treat it as you're on call and maybe you get pulled into some stuff today, maybe you won't. Who knows? We'll see what the day holds. No, this is a product. The product serves customers. The customers are your coworkers, not external customers. You can be really transparent with them. You can be very in the weeds. You can see exactly what their work is, and you can be very sure that you're solving the right problems for them. But that methodology needs to come in there. But I love that you're talking about everything here as a customer first, also standardizing, focus on what is important to us. Oh, we're doing a bunch of APIs. We're also doing a billion other things. Okay, we don't have to boil the ocean right now. Let's start with identifying a platform, putting it in place. How do people interact with that? Let's get that really solid. And let's solve one critical use case. These microservices are always the same structure. They're always the same architecture. They're always the same thing. How do we make it really easy for anybody to spin up one of those and manage one of those? How do we get a production API up and running, live, handling load without anybody in quote DevOps having to look at it? That's, I think, like an ultimate goal is a customer has done a complete deployment with no human intervention.
Yeah. Because when you hit that stage, like that's so cool. Like to just walk into the office one morning and find out that there's a brand new service that's live in production and it has all of the infrastructure requirements that you would have put in manually. They're just there magically. Like that's such a cool feeling.
It's the best. I think one problem that many early IDP teams, early platform teams run into here is, oh, we started with the API, we standardized it, great, everyone's happy. Oh shoot, this one team has a specific TLS version that they need, or they're using a different framework, or a different type of load balancer, or there's some reason that this is special, this is slightly different. And you kind of have to face the problem of either I make this thing flexible and make that kind of an option, or you know what, this is a different use case, maybe this is a product too. How do you think about the kind of constant scope creep that happens naturally in any engineering org and mitigating that as a platform engineer?
Yeah, for sure. Scope creep is the thing that will keep your product from being successful if you try to hit all the edge cases. And the first thing I try to do is when I encounter that situation is understand, like in your example, they need a specific TLS version, dig in and understand, is that like what's driving that requirement? Because there are scenarios where, it's just not a problem. Like, okay, we know we need to upgrade our TLS, but it's a huge undertaking and we don't have the bandwidth to do it right now. All right, cool. Fair enough. We're not building a product to address that. Or, on the other end of that spectrum, well, we're using this specific TLS version because it offers these features, but it's not yet mainstream yet. Okay, well, maybe that's going to be coming down to all of our other APIs soon. So that might be a good option to parameterize that or create that as a new product. So I really think understanding the context of why your customers are asking for something unique and special, and then evaluate it based on that.
Yeah, I love that. I think interviews, I've been on product teams where number of user interviews that happen in a given week or a given month, that's like a core KPI. I've never been on a DevOps team where that's a core KPI, and maybe that's a problem that should be fixed. If you've gone a week or two without actually interviewing your customers, how do you know what the right next thing to build is?
Oh, that's a great point. I like that. I'm totally stealing it.
You're welcome to it. Let me know how it improves the Polygon IDP.
Absolutely.
So actually, to that point, I'm curious. If you're listening to this and getting all excited about platform engineering, and you want to go and get started and go interview all the developers at your company, it can be daunting to imagine building a whole framework and a whole platform that's going to support every engineer. You could be a you could have hundreds or thousands of coworkers in the development environment. Are there any tools that you have seen recently or you'd recommend that are kind of helpful for new platform engineers trying to get started quickly? Any interesting things happening in the market right now that worth calling out could be a good first Google?
Yeah, for sure. Like one of the things that we are quite insistent on at Polygon is not writing any code to build anything that's not our core competency, which is blockchain. So when it comes to, putting in an IDP or anything for that matter, a ticketing system or whatever, we're not going to build it because that's not what we do for a living. We'll just get it from someone who does that for a living, whether you're talking about, using Zeet or, the main cloud providers are offering something along those lines. And they're not really admitting it that I've seen, but specifically AWS, they're kind of driving towards this with their updated UI and the different products that you see them coming out with, which is fine. I would much rather see them build it than for me and my team to have to build it. There's a website, we've mentioned Devops is dead a few times here, and that actually came from Luca Galante. He was the one who started that meme, who works for Humanitech, and he runs the platform engineering mailing list, and there's a website for it. But their website is super educational for listing all of the different things about platform engineering, the different components of IDP, and some really great blog articles. So that's a great starting point there. If you're just starting to scratch the surface of platform engineering, that's a great educational resource.
Yeah, the platform engineering community is an incredible one. Their Slack is great too. I think a platform is coming up in June. We're going to be doing some stuff around that as well. So
nice.
That's a great call out. I love that you mentioned the clouds here. I think one thing that we hear a lot in conjunction with platform engineering is, this kind of abstracts away the cloud provider for at least the developers or the kind of consumers, the users of your product. And so many platform engineering teams that we've talked to are actually leveraging multiple clouds underneath their platform. And that's something that they couldn't quite do as much before. But now that there's this higher level abstraction, where the compute is actually being scheduled comes an implementation detail. I'm curious how, and this might be relevant to your work at Polygon. I know critical to Polygon's success is being very distributed in compute.
Right?
I'm
For sure.
Curious how you kind of see multi-cloud and platform engineering intersecting here.
Yeah, I think multi-cloud is pretty cool. I think there's very, very few use cases where it's in the past. There's very few use cases where it was actually worth the time and effort to do. Because a lot of times the justification I would hear for being multi-cloud is, what if AWS goes down? Or what if GCP goes down? I'm like, dude.
You got bigger problems, honestly.
Yeah, like if AWS is down, if there's a single airline left operating in the world, I'm heading to an island in the Caribbean, just calling it good. So, and then, along with that, okay, sure, it's good to have like fault tolerance, and it's good to spread out your risk, but the sheer cost of doing that manually is pretty significant because you have doubled the cost of your infrastructure. And then you're adding more on top of that because you've got now this infrastructure in different geographic locations, where if a user accesses service A on GCP and makes a transaction, then you've got to get that data replicated over to the database and the other cloud providers. So there's a huge amount of overhead involved with that didn't really make sense to me for a lot of companies until we started seeing multi-cloud providers come out. And so now you've got some providers out there who are implementing this, where then whether you're running on Azure or GCP or AWS or splitting across all of them, it's always the same interface from your platform engineering perspective. And so from that perspective, I think it actually makes sense now if that's something you want to take on. Specifically in the case of Polygon, we have a commitment to being decentralized and distributed. So it's something that we do. And so being able to do that from a single interface makes it so much easier than having to build and maintain that by hand.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there of, it's really about, this has always been kind of possible, but the value benefit or the cost effort is not quite there. It's pretty hard to do multi-cloud effectively, or it has been very hard to do multi-cloud effectively. Even just, oh, shoot, which API should I hit? Okay, one is start instance, the other is create instance. They're slightly different. Oh, a GCP instance ID is not equivalent to an EC2 instance ID. There's just a mountain of nuance. I do think with these kind of multi-cloud providers or platforms that can span multiple providers, see more and more multi-cloud use cases. And I think people are finding other benefits than have traditionally been talked about. So it's less about, disaster recovery and reliability is still there, but I'm sure you guys run up against this in Polygon. Compliance can be a real issue of where is your data being stored. That could be incredibly important. I think I spoke with an infrastructure leader a couple of weeks ago who has a platform in place for spinning up compute for like VMs. And without really telling the rest of the engineering org, he made it so that half the time it goes to Google Cloud and saved about 20% on their compute bill that month. And it just decides whatever cloud is cheaper at runtime and schedules it there. Like, that's not too insanely difficult of a thing to implement if everybody's already going through your platform. And you can make these opaque changes underneath, swapping out where is the compute getting scheduled. I'm very interested in seeing more and more of these use cases pop up around compliance, around availability, around just cost savings.
Yeah, I think cost savings is one of the big things that you can leverage there as different providers come out with different savings plans or different pricing structures for different type of instances and resources. Just being able to, with relative ease, switch over and take advantage of that. If you're running a very large organization, you can crank up some decent savings just doing that.
Yeah. And actually, not a very large organization, but a little anecdote here. We work with a lot of, at Zeet, we work with a lot of very early stage companies who are looking to develop platforms for one reason or another, and cost savings is often one of them. We recently saw a team who very, very early, it was like 2 people, just an idea and a couple of early customers, no money raised or anything, and they were scaling fast, but they needed to minimize the bill. They could not spend a cent. And of course, they got credits from AWS. They got 5K, then they eventually got 100K, and they're running on that. But they're just spinning up new EC2 instances every day. They're burning through those credits. That 100K lasts them like 3 months. And they get to the end of it, and they're building a AI service. And so it's right around the same time as OpenAI and Azure news comes out, and they manage to get 100K of Azure credits. And so they move and they swap over to Azure. Right. And so they run there for 3 months, and then they're like, this is great, but we've run out of credits again. They go and they talk to Google. Google gives them another 100K of credits. They swap over there. This 2-person team, I've seen them now on 3 different clouds, nine, coming up on 10 actually, 10 months of free compute, hundreds to thousands of concurrent EC2 instances at every moment. It's just remarkable how much they've stretched these credits just by having this platform on top and allowing them to make that switch whenever they want
then
to.
The next step is the new email address and the fake mustache going back to AWS. Hello, sir, I'm a new customer.
Hi, I'm Donnie Jealous. Good to meet you.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's probably bad for the cloud providers, but good for us as the users of the cloud providers. They forces them to be a little more competitive here. If your customers can switch clouds in seconds instead of months, it's going to make it a lot more competitive, and we'll all benefit from the innovation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I don't really see that as being a bad thing, because just what we do, we have to innovate fast. We have to fail fast. Like, if we're going to fail, I want to do it this week rather than first quarter next year. And that's just a cost of being in a startup. But from a provider's perspective, I think they're going to want to embrace that and help you fail fast as well too, because then that gets you onto your next project, and eventually you're going to hit a successful project, which is where they will, be able to monetize you as a customer for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, and it really aligns incentives here, right? They're going to, after they run out of all their credits on all 3 of these clouds, the startup is going to probably choose one to rest on for a little while. How are they going to make that decision? Probably going to be whoever had the best experience, the best availability, the best uptime, the best, etc. And so that's what they should compete on. I'm a big fan of the cloud wars going on right now, and seeing the innovation that comes out of it and kind of the competitive nature of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I love the competitive aspect of it.
Awesome. Well, we've touched on Polygon a couple bits here and talked a little bit about the IDP. Curious, just like we've defined DevOps here loosely. When you say you're senior developer, or sorry, senior DevOps engineer at Polygon, what does a day in the life look like? What types of challenges are you working on? What types of problems are you working to solve? Because I imagine it might look a little different than a typical DevOps engineer.
Yeah, it does, because everyone in the blockchain space is learning. And for the past few years, a lot of the effort has been on just getting, like, what are the core features a blockchain has to have to be a blockchain? What are the security features? How do we there's always a lot of focus on transactions per second and gas fees and that kind of stuff. And so that's where a lot of the effort has really been. And now we're seeing some success in that. And so it's onto that scaling problem now. But scaling in the blockchain world is actually a little challenging, because if you're not familiar with how blockchain works, it's basically everyone has their own copy of the database, and anyone can participate in this. But to participate in it, you've got to get a copy of that database, which for some chains can be, we're talking terabytes. So your startup cost to launch a node on a blockchain involves syncing terabytes of data, which is pretty challenging. And that's, it's a barrier. It's like an entry level barrier just to participate in the game. So that's one of the things we're dealing with there, is how do we make that an easier process for people? Because our goal is to build a blockchain that anyone and everyone can participate in, but we got to lower that barrier to participation. So we got to figure out a way to get that multi-terabyte database onto their system in a quick and efficient fashion, and run on performant hardware. And then there's a lot of work going on in addition to that, like just kind of standardizing blockchain software, because a lot of the work that's been done here has just been focused on the blockchain aspect of it itself, and the deployment and packaging aspect of it. It's in a position where it could use some love there. So our team has been working a lot on that, just to kind of make getting a blockchain up and running very similar to just installing any other package or application on Linux.
I love that. I love first of all, you're talking here about lowering the barrier to entry, which honestly I see kind of cloud as a whole is being a massive innovation to lower the barrier of entry of technology around the world. You don't need, in the old world and on-prem, you needed like a ton of money and a ton of time and expertise to go and rack a server at a data center. Now you just need a credit card and an internet connection. It's awesome. Now you guys are bringing that down even more, so you don't even need a credit card. Anyone can participate if they got some Matic, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, what a difficult challenge, moving terabytes onto every single computer. You're no easy task from a DevOps perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a problem that's only going to continue to grow over time, just because of the nature of the blockchain. Everyone has to have a copy of the database, because that's how we can validate all of the transactions going back to the beginning of time. So it's not a problem that's going to go away or get smaller, regardless of which blockchain you're talking about. So it's been interesting to talk about and come up with different solutions to help with that.
And I've heard, I'm curious your take on this, but I've heard it be said that Web3 is it's a new development it's a new compute paradigm, and it's kind of a new compute platform. Honestly, there's a argument to be made that you guys are just one big platform engineering team for the whole world. You guys are inventing these new abstractions and these new paradigms, giving these an easy to use way to developers so they don't have to learn the underlying nuance. I've seen that analogy. I think it's an interesting one. I'm curious your take. Is it a reasonable analogy that Polygon's a platform for all engineers?
I think that's pretty reasonable to say, because we're just building it for the rest of the world to use and benefit from. Like we have no stake in it other than just building it and putting it out there for the world to consume and do super cool things with.
And you got to constantly do user interviews and make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
We have a new segment that we've been trying out, and would love to have you participate. We're calling it a hack and a horror. So the premise here is you have worked in many companies. You've seen DevOps done many different times, many different ways, and you've had your fair share of learnings in that. I think everyone who spent time in infrastructure has a horror story or a war story of some midnight outage or remarkable deadlock on some production database or something like that. I'm curious, for everybody here who's listening and maybe is thinking about building a platform or is in the throes of doing that or is just starting their DevOps journey, could you share with us your favorite horror story of some time that something's gone horribly wrong in DevOps, and maybe the one DevOps hack that you learned from it that you've taken with you going forward so it will never happen again?
Yeah, for sure. I've actually told the story a few times, and I like sharing it specifically with people who are just getting started in DevOps and worried about like the level of responsibility that you have, and perhaps letting fear get the better part of their judgment. So years and years ago, I worked for a company that was a teleradiology company. It was pre-DevOps, but it was an IT/SRE type role where we were responsible for all of the hospitals that were our customers. So to give you a little background, when someone went to a hospital and had a CAT scan or an X-ray done, the radiologist who interpreted those images was never at the hospital. They were an employee of ours. So the hospital would send the images through a VPN tunnel to us. We would look at our software would look at the images, determine who the most qualified radiologist online with us at the time was, and then send those images to that radiologist wherever in the world they happened to be. They would look at the images, give their report findings, and we would send that back to the hospital. And in many instances, we're talking about trauma patients here, people coming in with heart attacks, strokes, car crashes, or whatever. And so the team that I was on, our job was anytime a hospital couldn't send the images through, then they would transfer them over to us, and we would just start troubleshooting. Was it a problem with a server? Was it a VPN issue? Was it user error? Didn't matter. Once the call came through to us, we owned it to resolution. And so there were many, many instances where we would get the call and it would be the nurse in the emergency room. And there's a lot of pressure there because, someone's healthcare, possibly their life, is on the line.
Mission critical.
Yeah. And so there were multiple instances, where we just get the phone and say, all right, you go take care of the patient, put me on speakerphone. I'm going to find these images and get them through for you. And they would do that. So you would be on speakerphone with them in the emergency room, whether they were doing, chest compressions or reviving the patient or whatever. Meanwhile, you're poking through VPN tunnels, digging in servers, forcing images through backup tunnels, because every hospital we had configured with a primary tunnel and 2 backup VPN tunnels. So you were digging through any network connection you could get to force those images through. The reason I point all that out is because when you're in your first outage or in your first incident, it's tempting for a lot of people to freak out or to stress out and say, oh man, this is not for me. And so I share that story to just tell people, it's going to be okay. I know that Bill from sales is all pissed off because the website's down right now, but 15 minutes from now, an hour from now, the website's going to be up and Bill from sales is still going to be alive. So just put things in perspective and just sit back and don't let the stress get to you. Don't let the pressure force you into making a rash decision, because you've always got time to debug a little bit, to validate your assumptions, to talk it over with your peers, and then make a positive change in the environment that's going to move the issues closer to resolution.
Wow, you've got the first place record for a horror story. That's terrifying. I can remember, the first time you were in an incident or first time in an outage and you're on call and you have to jump on to firefight, and oh my God, everything's whirring at a million miles a minute, and the CEO is pinging you or Bill from sales, whoever it is.
Right.
Life being on the line there. Thankfully, never had to be in that position, but it's very stressful. But I think the lesson is very real. In those situations, whether it's life on the line or revenue on the line or just somebody's experience, people are coming to you and using your product for a reason. There's someone on the other side, and it's really easy to let that pressure get to you. And actually moving too quickly there, or making a quick fix that doesn't actually resolve the issue, or doing what is thought to be a quick fix that actually makes the issue worse. I've done that once or twice.
Right.
Could do much more harm than good. You're in a critical position. I remember it wasn't necessarily the same scale of having life on the line, but One of my first SRE positions was we were building an esports company. And so we were running giant live video tournaments of people playing video games on Twitch. I was in school at the time, and so I was both on call and not always available, which is a stressful combination. But we ran one of the largest Fortnite tournaments I want to say it was 2018, and had tens to 20, I think it was 20, 30,000 people come and compete in this giant tournament, including some celebrities. Like we had a Soulja Boy and a Ninja and some other kind of esports personalities there. And I was on call, and I got a phone call in the middle of a math final and had to pick up, and it was Soulja Boy on the other line. And he was like, hey, why is it not working? I'm like, I don't know. And I'm getting calls from him, his manager, then my boss starts calling me, other engineers on our team start calling me. And the best thing that we did there was just made a group call in Slack, jumped in there, we debugged the issue, took 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But all was resolved because we took it slow and we didn't rush too much. First step was not go and just SSH onto boxes and start restarting them and see if that fixes it.
Yeah, for sure.
Which then can be the common first take.
Yeah, for sure. And that's very tempting to do that because you're feeling this pressure. Oh, I got to do something. I got to do anything. But it's a hard lesson to learn that doing anything most often makes things worse than better.
Yeah. And also it will happen. You will break things. That is okay. That is normal. That's par for the course. Don't try to break things, and make sure that you fix the things that you break and don't make it a habit. But it will happen. It's okay. It's a part of having responsibility.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially in our world.
Yeah. There's a story I heard several years ago. Someone said that they broke something, took down production, and cost like $200,000 in lost revenue or whatever. So they went and talked to their boss, like, I suppose I'm fired right now. And the boss's response was the greatest response I've ever heard. And he said, no, I just spent $200,000 in your education. Why would I fire you now?
That's great. That's exactly right. Yeah. I love that. Especially those early career mistakes. Easy to happen. Just don't let it happen again. I've got a story that I'm sure you'd like about an intern I was training accidentally deleting an entire AWS region, but maybe we save that for next time.
Right.
Well, Will, it's been a pleasure to chat with you today. This has been great. For anyone listening who wants to hear more of you or learn about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. Check out my YouTube channel, Devops for Developers. Check out the videos there. Leave a comment. I respond to all the comments, or I hang out occasionally on Twitter, mainly posting memes and stupid jokes, but you can find me on Twitter at 0xWillButton.
Awesome. And for all the listeners, thank you for joining and listening in today. Come follow us on Zeet on Twitter and listen to the next episode. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.